of the VUCA world and its implications, and also a most entertaining tour of the VUCA world and its implications. Of all the references that I might have predicted that Professor Pant would make in his talk, the last thing I would have suggested was a reference to electric toothbrushes. So that will stay with me for quite a long time. I have a choice, ladies and gentlemen. I could either stand up here, where you can hear me and you can see me, or I can be down here, where you can hear me, but you may not be able to see me very well at the back. Well, I've been described as somebody who has a good face for radio. So I've decided on the second option, and I'm going to stay here rather than go up there. What I'd like to do for the next few minutes is turn to the significance of the English language within that VUCA reality which Professor Pant referred to. And I'm going to talk about the position of English today and how that's likely to impact in the future on the learners who we have responsibility for and on us as educationalists. I'm very much taking an international perspective about this, rather than one which is specific to India. You are the experts on the local situation and not me, and I'm very conscious of that. So, VUCA is a reality. When I first came across it, I felt that it was quite an aggressive and unfriendly concept. Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. None of these things are immediately words which make me feel particularly positive about the world. What I hope I can demonstrate in this part of this afternoon is that access to English language is one way of making VUCA much more of a challenge to be embraced rather than some sort of juggernaut that should be avoided and hidden from. To start, I'd just like to mention some general themes which infiltrate all of the topics which I'm going to cover. And those general themes are, firstly, the significance of English as a lingua franca, a common language for a wide variety of purposes, for those people who otherwise would have limited communication only. Linked to that is the idea of the connected world, the internet, social media, opportunities to travel. In the past, if there was no common language, for most people, did it really matter in many contexts, as they had little or no need or opportunity to communicate with others beyond their immediate language group and the immediate area where they lived and where their activity was. The internet, and only half the world has access to the internet, the other half of the world is still waiting for it. Cheap travel changes all of those things, so there's much more of a driver towards a connected world. And thirdly, the economic advantage of being able to use a common language, the prosperity that brings to individuals and to societies as a whole. And each of these elements, each of those three elements, I think feed on each other to make them more significant and therefore grow the whole. Economic benefit enables a connected world with more access to digital technology, also requires that connected world to deliver progress. Achieving a connected world requires a common language, which doesn't mean it's the only language, and it doesn't mean the death of other languages, but I think that is an important element. So eventually, the three general areas become almost indivisible from each other. As more people are connected, they need access to a lingua franca, and we hope they therefore enjoy the prosperity which flows from that experience and that skill. The fact that we're talking about the importance of English in a VUCA world rather than another language is one of those complex accidents of history which I don't think we have time to go into this afternoon. But when I was preparing this talk, I came across something which was published quite recently, which claimed that English language was, and I quote, "the greatest gift which the UK has given the world." Thinking about the history of English, not just the history related to language policy, I found that quite an uncomfortable concept. And then again, thinking about it, if you give a gift to somebody, once you've handed the gift over, you can't ask for it back. And you can't insist about how it's used. I was reading this part of the talk to somebody and asking for their comments, and they objected to this, and they pointed out that the exception to that rule is mothers-in-law. But the concept of the gift which can't be returned and the gift where you can't insist on how it's used, that's the case with English as well. So English is no longer owned by people, if it ever was, from the UK, or it's not owned by the Americans. It's owned it belongs surely to everybody who uses English, whether or not they're a mother tongue speaker of the language or not. Leaving history aside, why is it that English is so significant? Well, there are about 7.2 billion people on the earth, and there are about 7,000 languages. Although counting languages is a bit tricky. You know, when does a variety or a dialect become a language in its own right? 2/3 of those people, those 7.2 billion people, speak just 12 of the 7,000 languages. And English isn't the biggest, as you can see from the chart, but it is the one which probably has the most spread. There are over 100 countries that use English one way or another as a national language or as an official language. You can also see that once you're past the top 5 or 6 languages, the number declines rapidly. And there's a very long tail leading to the smallest of the 7,000 languages, where there are only a handful of speakers, and you have to sadly question the viability of those languages and their prospects for survival in the future. It's also worth pointing out, perhaps, that although Mandarin is a very large block in the middle, in fact there are numerous varieties of Mandarin which are not necessarily mutually intelligible to people. So Mandarin itself doesn't form a lingua franca even among the people who are listed as speakers of Mandarin on the chart. And that's one reason why English is a preferred foreign language. The numbers of learners of English, which is what this chart shows, as a foreign or as an additional language, was estimated in 2015 as about 1.5 billion. And it's calculated to increase to 2 billion by 2020. And surely we are almost at 2020. That's certainly what it feels like. That in itself is a reflection of the VUCA world and the growing impact of the fourth industrial revolution. So, what are the drivers from the perspective of businesses, of the individual and his or her family, and of national policy and what governments do in this area? In the corporate world, there's a pressing need for organizations to remain competitive. That means effective buying and selling, which requires communication with customers, with partners, and with suppliers. Without a common language, a company can't access those opportunities and must surely be at a disadvantage compared to its analogues and other competitor organizations in the same field. For corporations operating across borders or big multinational organizations, there's a need to distribute tasks to make the best use of resources, human resources and other types of resources as well, and of using people's skills and their knowledge, and that demands a common language to be able to do that and to be able to share those skills and that knowledge. Also, big corporations are constantly changing shape. They acquire bits and pieces, other companies, other activity, and they divest themselves on a regular basis of that activity as well. And that requires a common language to negotiate mergers, acquisitions across boundaries. It's increasingly typical that large organizations look to staff in middle and more senior roles to communicate for all purposes, such as internal meetings in English, even where none of the participants are necessarily mother tongue English users. So, for example, Nissan in Japan implemented an English-first strategy as long ago as the 1990s. In 2015, Honda announced that its corporate language would be English by 2020 and is well on track to delivering that objective. The German electronics company Siemens also made English its official language many years ago, along with a lot of other organizations. And I found that recent quote from the Harvard Business Review, and that's clearly an increasing trend among organizations. At the other extreme of the spectrum, we have the individual and his or her family. And people are, of course, aware of the fierce competition for the best jobs in the marketplace. And it feels increasingly competition for any sort of job which has reasonable prospects for the future. And English language differentiates candidates for the same role who otherwise appear to have the same experience and the same qualifications, both in their initial employment and for promotion prospects in the future. The idea of using language proficiency for other purposes isn't a new one. Using language to differentiate candidates has been something that's been around for a long time. I studied law at university, and I can remember, a long time ago I have to say, and I can remember that my choice of university was limited because I didn't have a qualification in one particular subject. What subject do you think that was? Well, it was Latin. There was no functional reason why I needed to know Latin. Lawyers sometimes use little Latin expressions, but they're just bits of jargon. You don't need to have an understanding of Latin in order to be able to be a lawyer. Those universities were simply using a requirement for Latin, in this case, as a way of restricting the number of applicants. There was also an element of educational snobbery about requesting Latin as well, I think. I was telling that story to somebody at another talk that I did in England recently, and this person was very interested and was asking me about it afterwards. And he said, "Oh, that's very interesting. That's very interesting." And then he said, "But did they require knowledge of ancient Latin or modern Latin?" That's very different to the situation for English today, where there's an increasingly urgent need for individuals to actually function in the language, to be functional in the language very extensively. Another aspect of opportunity is study in further or higher education and maybe overseas. Increasingly, higher education courses are taught in English or have an English requirement to graduate, even in non-Anglophone countries. So, for example, I have a friend who's doctor in Colombia. He's from Colombia in Latin America, South America. His first language is Spanish, but he recently completed a master's degree in pharmacology in Barcelona. And the course was entirely conducted in, and it was entirely assessed in English rather than in Spanish. In total, there are about 4.5 million students enrolled in university-level courses outside their home country. 50% of those are from Asia, and the top destination countries include the UK, Australia and New Zealand, and the USA in particular. And I'm aware that there's a great interest here in attracting incoming students to some of the prestigious educational institutions in India as well. A further aspect is migration and international migration. You can see the figures on the slide there. It's something which has been growing enormously over the last few years. It's a vast number. And it's worth noting that 90% of people who migrate are, as it were, migrating voluntarily. They're not refugees or asylum seekers. They're people who are migrating of their own volition. And common language really helps to facilitate both migration and later on successful integration into societies in new environments, perhaps in new regions or countries. In Europe, in the 5 years after 2000, the population of Europe would have fallen by 1% had it not been for migration. Inward migration. In fact, it rose by 2%. And that's important because migrants tend to be younger people. They tend to be between 25 and 35 years old. And the population of Europe is aging very fast. We need younger people in Europe. That said, most people do migrate within their own region. My last category was government and policy. And governments have increasingly recognized for a long time that there are broad benefits to society of equipping people with English language skills. English is increasingly regarded as a life skill rather than a subject of rather dry academic study. And governments are very keen to find ways to invest in young people to deliver those benefits for everybody in society. There are numerous educational reform programs around the world with the objective of improving standards of English, typically through initially encouraging the upskilling, the increase in skills of teachers, and also by increasing the number of English teachers and then watching the impacts of that flow through to students of English and English learning. There's also no doubt that higher levels of education overall bring economic benefit. The levels of education in OECD countries, for people who have completed university education, they earn 70% more than those people who haven't completed university education. And there are some numbers on those slides about the number of people in work, depending on whether they've completed higher education. So the higher somebody's education is, they both are likely to find themselves in a better paid job, but also, very significantly, they're much more likely to find themselves employed in the first place. A growth in middle classes in many countries both drives demand for educational improvement, also provides an engine for its use. And by 2020, for the first time, the majority of people in the world will be classified as in the middle classes. It's a virtuous circle. Education improvement leads to more economic and educational improvement, particularly for women. And it's recognized that prosperity which flows from improved levels of English language goes to the individual, but it also goes to wider society. If better levels of English attract investment and better paid work opportunity, that immediately means there's more money in the economy. It immediately means that governments are collecting more by way of taxation, so providing funds and drivers for other improvements, including additional support for English language education for the next cohort of learners who are coming along. More broadly, better educated and more economically successful societies are likely to be more stable societies, safer places and more secure places to live. I'm thinking particularly of those people who are the refugees or asylum seekers, of which there are millions around the world, and who sometimes meet ambivalence or even hostility in the countries that they move to. But those work opportunities, as Professor Pant referred to, are changing fast in our VUCA world and with the impact of the fourth industrial revolution. As technology develops, that means that some existing jobs become more marginal, particularly lower skill and manual roles. And newer employment roles emerge, with much more prominent roles for women in particular in STEM jobs. I don't know if you're familiar with the term STEM. You are STEM jobs where women are typically underrepresented. The World Economic Forum quotes a prediction that 65% of children in primary school today will eventually find themselves in employment roles which so far don't have names because they don't exist. That's quite a prospect. And some job centres are set to grow and increase as an implication of that, particularly in the world of computing, mathematics, engineering, and specialists in data analysis. The world is a data-driven world, and people collecting all this data. There's a very urgent and increasingly pressing need for those clever people who can actually help us to interpret that data and give us an understanding of what to do with all the data that's being collected. The World Economic Forum also says that other areas will decline, particularly in general office work and administration, as those roles are replaced or made unnecessary by artificial intelligence, by big data, which I just mentioned, and by the Internet of Things, that is, embedding clever Internet technology in everyday activity. So people are likely to be working much more flexibly in the future and experience a need to develop new skills throughout their working life. They'll require retraining through their working lives. It's already been said that somebody who does a technical degree course will find 50% of what they studied in year one is out of date when they get to their final year. What are my prospects for being able to program the video recorder in future? I mean, it must be zero. It's just too hard for me. What is constant is a need for communication, for language and facility in English, because that's a core skill. It's a core content skill. And it's also an enabler. Whether you want to access scientific journals, I found a figure in researching this talk that said that 90% of articles in technical journals online worldwide are now published in universities. Or if you want to use language skills for persuasion, negotiation, managing people, being involved with a team in solving complex problems, then language skills are critical and transferable. Ability in English language, once developed and if used regularly, is one area that shouldn't need retraining in the future, unlike all of those other areas which are likely to require retraining for people. Now, this is an audience of educationalists. Many of you, I know, are English teachers or have a background in English teaching. I'm very happy to say that it is predicted that teaching is one area where there won't be a decline as a result of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We all have a vested interest in that, don't we? But it will change, and of course it's changing already. Technology enables mobile learning and an approach to activity beyond the classroom, which is way past what we're all used to. Data collection from learners, including English language learners, can be used to give each learner specific tailored feedback on what they've studied and on their performance in a way that even when teachers have wanted to do that, it simply hasn't been feasible because the effort and the energy and the time involved is simply too much for individual teachers to be able to take on. And what we teach will change as well. There will be new skills that come to dominate. So Professor Pant referred to the Dickens novel, The Tale of Two Cities. I think if he had time, he'd probably quote the entire novel to us. But do your students sit at home reading the novels of Charles Dickens, do you think? Possibly not? Okay. I mean, they're more likely perhaps to be looking at websites rather than blocks of text in books in fully formed sentences and paragraphs. And the quality of reading websites is that there is a blurring. There are lots of different small extracts. There are hyperlinks that have to be gone to in order to get to the story and the information behind it. The approach needed is quite different. And I think the same goes for other main language skills. I come from very much a teaching and particularly an assessment background. And we've been developing computer-based tests. And I don't know whether you're familiar with computer-based language tests. If you're not, they will arrive and people will increasingly regard them as being something which is commonplace and a routine aspect of life. And one of the things that I was thinking about is that in a computer-based language test, typically you find that the spell check and the grammar check is switched off, so you can't access it. Well, why? If you just think about it, if I write something which is of any importance, I would always use the spell check and the grammar check. And there's a skill involved in using the spell check and the grammar check correctly as well. So I would like to see those things introduced. But my point is that as teachers, we don't necessarily focus, as English teachers, on the things which language learners most urgently need to know and need to learn and the skills that they require. So VUCA is about change, and people as a generality, to thinking of all of us, are often characterized as being rather resistant to change and not liking it very much. And I think we can all think of people who fit into that category, those people who don't really embrace change, they don't really like it at all. But I do have some problems with that idea as a generalization, because it seems to me that people object to change which doesn't make very good sense to them, which they don't understand, and where they can't see the opportunity that is going to benefit them from the change. Through life, surely, change is what we all do, and we adapt to it, and we make the best of it. That's what humans do. And I see VUCA and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and I hope you do, not as a threat which we should hide from, but as an opportunity. But an opportunity that needs to be thought through and acted on now rather than in the future. That's all I had to say, and thank you very much for your attention this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger, for that interesting presentation and sharing of some really very good data and statistics.